The furnace pipe had been ticking wrong for 3 nights before I found them, and on the 3rd night I finally got tired enough of the sound to go looking with a lantern instead of just pounding the wall and going back to bed. I'd run the boiler at the Aldergate for going on 22 years. I knew every knock and groan that building could make, the way you know a man's cough well enough to tell his flue from his lying. This wasn't the boiler. This was higher up, in the old flue that fed the chimney nobody used anymore, the one that ran up through the wall behind the coal chute like a crooked spine. I climbed the ladder with my knees, complaining the whole way, and put my ear to the brick, and what I heard wasn't metal at all. It was 2 small things breathing hard, and one of them was crying. I pried the grate loose with a pry bar I keep for exactly that kind of stubborn, and the lantern light fell on 2 hatchlings no bigger than house cats, wedged together in the ash and old soot, scales the color of a spent coal fire, black going to dull orange at the edges, like they hadn't decided yet whether to be burnt out or still glowing. One had its wing dragged crooked under itself, the other had its mouth open, and no sound coming out anymore, which scared me worse than the crying had. I did not know, that first night, that the city had already signed the order to bring this whole building down in 11 days. I found that out the next morning, from a man named Denny Loach standing in my boiler room with a clipboard, and a look on his face like he was already picturing the crane. "Corvain Holdings owns the lot now," he said. "Whole block, actually. You've got tenants to notify and mechanicals to shut down safe. I'll need this room clear by Thursday." I told him I'd get right on it. I did not mention what was living behind the flue wall, wrapped in my second-best coat, drinking condensed milk off my fingers, because neither of them could yet manage a bowl. I want to be honest about what kind of man I am, because it matters to the rest of this. I am not brave. I have never once in my life picked a fight I could avoid, and I let Denny Loach walk out of that boiler room without telling him a single true thing, and I did it without much of a fight in my own conscience either. I had 2 dying animals and 11 days, and somewhere out past Harrow's End was a grown thing capable of setting a building on fire if it thought I'd hurt its young, and none of that left much room in me for bravery. It left room for arithmetic. Feed them. Hide them. Buy time. That was the whole of my plan for a week and a half. The wing-dragged one I started calling Fen, because it listed like a boat that's taken water. The quiet one I called Roan, for no better reason than the color came to mind and stuck. By day 4, Roan had a voice again. Thin, rusty, but a voice. And by day 6, both of them could stand on the coal chute lip and glare at me while I mixed their milk, which felt like the first real progress either of us had made. I did not know what kind of dragon they were. I want to say that plainly, because a man in my position develops theories, and mine were mostly wrong. I guessed farm stock, run off from some breeder's failed brood. I guessed worse things too, in the nights when Fen wouldn't eat. What I did not guess, not once in those 11 days, was that the flue I'd pried open had been a nest for longer than the Aldergate had been a building. That the tenement had been built up around a chimney that was never really a chimney at all, and that something with wings had been coming home to that exact seam of brick since before the first tenant ever paid rent on the place. I found that out from an old woman on the 3rd floor, Mrs. Pettigrew, who'd lived in the building since before I was born, and who caught me hauling a sack of feed corn up the back stairs on day 8 and didn't ask a single question about why. "My mother used to leave the coal chute cracked in summer," she said, like she was continuing a conversation we'd never started. Said something used it for a door. Nobody minded. It never took more than it needed. I asked her what she meant by something. She just looked at me, the way you look at a man who's already found the answer and is only pretending he hasn't, and went back inside. Day 7 nearly ended the whole arrangement before it had a chance to matter. Loach came down unannounced to check the boiler's serial plate for his paperwork. No warning, no knock, and I had exactly enough time to kick the ash bin shut over Fen's tail before Loach's flashlight swept the corner where I'd been standing. He asked why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I told him the pilot light had flared and singed my eyebrows, which wasn't true, and which he didn't believe for a second, but a man with a clipboard and a schedule to keep rarely chases a lie that isn't slowing him down. He wrote his numbers and left. I sat on the floor afterward with my back against the ash bins for longer than I want to admit, listening to Fen's breathing even back out, and understood for the first time how thin the wall really was between what I was doing and what I could lose for doing it. The room, the building, maybe the two of them, if Loach ever had a reason to look twice. By day 9, the demolition notices were up in every stairwell, red-bordered, official as a hanging. Loach came back with 2 men and a survey chain and told me the boiler needed to be fully drained and cold by Wednesday. No exceptions. City inspector coming through Thursday morning ahead of the crew. I told him it'd be handled. I went down that night and moved Fen and Roan into the coldest, deepest corner of the boiler room behind the old ash bins, because I did not have anywhere else in the world left to put them, and because some fool part of me still believed 11 days was enough time for whatever was out there to come looking before the city put a wrecking ball through the one door it knew. I was wrong about the math. I want to say that too. I thought I was buying time for a rescue that would arrive quiet, in the dark, the way I'd have done it myself. I had no idea what I was actually buying time for. Thursday came in gray and ordinary, the way the worst mornings always seem to, like the weather hasn't been told yet what's about to happen in it. The inspector walked through at 7. The crew's flatbeds were parked along Portage Row by 8, the crane already lifted and swinging its head like it was impatient to start. Tenants stood on the sidewalk with boxes. Mrs. Pettigrew stood apart from the rest of them, not packing anything, just watching the roofline with her hands folded, like she was at a funeral for someone who hadn't died yet. I was in the boiler room at 8:30, on my knees, in front of the ash bins, with Fen tucked against my chest, because he wouldn't stop shaking, telling him and Roan both, in the low, stupid voice you use on things that can't understand you, that it was going to be fine, that I'd figure something, that I always figured something. That was when the light in the coal chute changed. Not dimmed, changed. Gray morning light going gold at the edges, the way it does when something very large passes low overhead and the sun comes through its wings instead of around them. I heard the crane operator's radio crackle out on the street, heard a voice on it go from bored to something else entirely in about 4 words. I heard, very clearly, 40 feet of chain go still. I carried both hatchlings up the back stairs myself, because I was not going to let them see whatever was happening through a coal chute, and by the time I got to the roof access door, half the tenants on Portage Row had already stopped moving their boxes and were just standing in the street, heads back, mouths open. There were 9 of them in the sky over the Aldergate. I counted twice because I didn't believe the first count. Every color that ash and coal and old fire could turn, wings wide enough to lay shadow clean across the whole block, and not one of them diving, not one of them so much as raising a claw toward the crane, or the crew, or the men who'd have every reason in the world to expect an attack. They simply came down, one after another, and settled along the roofline, and the fire escapes, and the old cracked chimney cap, like they were coming home from a very long day's work. The last one down was the largest, ember orange, going to deep char at the wingtips, and she landed square in the middle of Portage Row itself, not 15 feet from where Denny Loach stood, with his clipboard gone slack in his hand, and his face gone the color of the paper on it. She didn't look at him at all. She looked at me, standing in the roof doorway with a hatchling too weak to stand tucked against each shoulder, and something in her chest made a sound I felt in my back teeth before I heard it in my ears. Fen answered her, thin and rusty, same as the day his voice came back, but unmistakable, and Roan a half-second behind him, and I have never in 22 years of tending that boiler heard a sound due to a street full of strangers, what that answer did to Portage Row. Grown men who'd come to swing a crane went dead quiet. Mrs. Pettigrew put a hand over her mouth. Somewhere behind me on the roof, one of the crew who'd been sent up to check the flashing dropped his tool belt on the tar paper and didn't bother picking it up. The other 8 along the roofline held perfectly still while all that happened below them, wings folded, heads turned toward the street, like a jury waiting on a verdict that had already, quietly, gone the only way it could. The matriarch came the rest of the way across the street on foot rather than on wing, slow, deliberate, the way you'd walk toward something you were afraid of frightening, and stopped at the bottom of the fire escape stairs, and waited. She did not come up to take them from me. She waited for me to bring them down, which I understood, once my legs agreed to work again, was its own kind of asking. I carried Fen and Roan down 11 flights of a building the city intended to have flattened by noon, and set them, at the last stair, on the ground in front of her, because it was not my place to decide whether they went to her arms or came back to mine. They went to her. Of course they went to her. She curled around both of them with a sound like a held breath finally let go, and I stood there feeling like the smallest, most useless man on that entire street, until she lifted her head and looked at me again, and this time she did not look away. What she did next wasn't kneeling, and it wasn't ceremony, and if you're waiting on this story for either, I'm sorry to tell you neither one came. She simply lowered her head, level with mine, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off her the way you feel a stove from across a room, and she held it there a long moment, and then she straightened up and turned that same still, level look on the crane, and on the men standing frozen beside it, and on Denny Loach's clipboard. Nobody swung that crane that day. I don't know what order came down from Corvain Holdings by that afternoon, and I never asked, because it wasn't the kind of thing you ask about out loud in front of 9 dragons roosting along your fire escapes. I only know that the demolition notices came down off the stairwell walls within the week, and that the Aldergate is still standing on Portage Row as I write this, and that Mrs. Pettigrew still leaves the coal chute cracked in summer, same as her mother did, same as whoever kept that habit before her. I still tend the boiler. That part of my life didn't change at all. What changed is that some mornings now, I climb to the roof before my shift starts, just to sit near the chimney cap while Fen and Roan doze in a heap with a half-dozen cousins I still can't tell apart, and their mother lets me, the same quiet way she let me carry them down those stairs, not because I earned anything, and not because anybody knelt to anybody, but because a man kept a door cracked open for 11 days when he had every reason in the world to shut it, and something with a very long memory decided that kind of door was worth keeping a man around for. They never did take the building down. I don't imagine they ever will, so long as I'm the one holding the key to that boiler room,